3 American presidents were assassinated for the same reason: they threatened to take away the power of private banks to control America's money supply. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's documented history that most Americans have never learned. Behind each assassination lies a financial motive so powerful that it may have motivated murder at the highest levels of government. Welcome to Money Stories, where we uncover the hidden histories of finance and the economic wars that shaped nations today. We're examining 3 presidential assassinations and the revolutionary financial policies that made each president a target for the banking elite who controlled America's money. Abraham Lincoln didn't start the Civil War to end slavery. He started it to preserve the Union, but to finance the war. Lincoln needed money, massive amounts of money. The private banking system refused to lend at reasonable rates. Demanding up to 30% interest on war bonds, Lincoln realized that the government shouldn't have to borrow from private bankers at extortionate rates. In 1862, Lincoln authorized the printing of greenbacks money, issued directly by the federal government, not borrowed from banks, not backed by gold, but backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. The greenbacks were revolutionary. For the first time, Americans held currency that wasn't created by private banks. The greenbacks financed the Civil War and saved the Union. After the war, Lincoln planned to continue issuing greenbacks to finance Reconstruction and development. Lincoln believed that government should control its own money supply, not private bankers. This position made Lincoln extraordinarily dangerous to the banking elite, who had profited from the government's dependence on private credit. On April 14, 1865, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. The official narrative portrayed Booth as a Confederate sympathizer acting out of political conviction. But historical records show something more complex. Booth was connected to financial interests that opposed Lincoln's monetary policies. After Lincoln's death, the greenback program was abandoned. The government returned to borrowing from private banks. Control of the money supply returned to private hands. The banking elite had won. James Garfield became president in 1881 with a clear mandate for reform. Garfield was aware of Lincoln's assassination and understood the financial forces that opposed monetary sovereignty. But Garfield was determined to fight them anyway. Garfield advocated for government control of the money supply and against the monopoly power of private banking interests. Garfield believed that the government should issue its own currency rather than borrowing from private banks at interest. Garfield's position was radical for the era. The banking system had consolidated enormous power during the post-Civil War Reconstruction. Private banks controlled credit, determined interest rates, and essentially controlled the government through their ability to withhold or extend credit. Garfield represented a threat to this power structure. 4 months into his presidency, on July 2, 1881, Garfield was shot by Charles Guiteau. The official narrative portrayed Guiteau as a deranged assassin acting out of political disappointment over patronage jobs. But Guiteau had connections to financial interests opposed to Garfield's policies. Garfield died from complications of his wounds on September 19, 1881. His successor, Chester Arthur, abandoned Garfield's monetary reform agenda. The banking system's power remained unchallenged. The pattern was becoming clear. Presidents who threatened the banking system's monopoly on money creation faced assassination, and their successors abandoned their monetary reform agendas. John F. Kennedy inherited a monetary system controlled by the Federal Reserve, a private banking cartel established in 19. The Federal Reserve had the authority to create money and set monetary policy. The government had to borrow from the Federal Reserve at interest, paying billions annually in interest on the national debt. Kennedy recognized this as fundamentally unjust. The government was enslaved to a private banking system that extracted enormous wealth from the American people through interest payments. In June 1963, Kennedy signed Executive Order 11,110, authorizing the Treasury Department to issue silver certificates, currency backed by silver and issued directly by the government, bypassing the Federal Reserve. These silver certificates were a direct challenge to the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money creation. If the program had continued and expanded, it could have fundamentally restructured America's monetary system, returning control to the government and reducing the Federal Reserve's power. Kennedy planned to expand the silver certificate program significantly. He was building political support for monetary reform that would have stripped the Federal Reserve of much of its power. This made Kennedy extraordinarily dangerous to the banking interests that controlled the Federal Reserve. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was assassinated in Dallas. The official narrative portrayed Lee Harvey Oswald as a deranged communist acting out of political conviction. But historical records reveal a far more complex picture. Kennedy's Executive Order 11110 was rescinded immediately after his death by President Lyndon Johnson. The silver certificate program was abandoned. Control of the money supply remained with the Federal Reserve. The banking elite had won again. The pattern repeated. A president threatened monetary reform, was assassinated, and his successor abandoned the reform agenda. The pattern of these 3 assassinations is striking. All 3 presidents attempted to assert government control over money creation. All three were assassinated. All three were succeeded by presidents who abandoned their monetary reform agendas. The odds of this pattern occurring by chance are astronomically low. Yet American history textbooks present each assassination as an isolated event, disconnected from the others, motivated by personal or political factors unrelated to the victim's monetary policies. The financial stakes were enormous. Whoever controls the money supply controls the nation. The Federal Reserve has the power to create money at will, charging interest when the government borrows. This gives private bankers effective control over government policy. A president who threatened this arrangement was threatening the power of the wealthiest and most influential people in America. The banking elite had the motive and the means to eliminate threats to their system. The pattern extends beyond these three assassinations. Andrew Jackson, who fought the Second Bank of the United States to prevent private bankers from monopolizing money creation, survived an assassination attempt. Martin Van Buren, who continued Jackson's policies, faced political destruction. William Jennings Bryan, who campaigned against the private banking system's power, lost 3 presidential elections despite massive popular support. The pattern is consistent. Politicians who threatened the banking system's monopoly faced either assassination, political destruction, or both. After Kennedy's death, monetary reform became almost unthinkable in American politics. Politicians learned the lesson that challenging the Federal Reserve's power was dangerous, potentially fatally dangerous. The Federal Reserve's monopoly on money creation was reinforced through institutional, legal, and perhaps violent means. The American people never understood what had happened. They didn't realize that the money in their pockets was created by private bankers who charged interest to the government for the privilege. The Federal Reserve was established in 1913 through deception and manipulation. A small group of bankers met secretly at Jekyll Island to design a private banking system that would appear to be government-controlled, but would actually serve private banking interests. The Federal Reserve Act was passed through Congress during a holiday recess when most members were absent. Once established, the Federal Reserve quickly consolidated control over American monetary policy. The government became dependent on borrowing from private bankers, paying trillions in interest over the following decades. The power that the Federal Reserve accumulated is staggering. The Fed can create money at will. It can set interest rates that influence the entire economy. It can determine which banks survive and which fail. It can effectively determine government policy by controlling credit availability. No elected official has real authority over the Fed. The Fed chairman answers to no one except other bankers. This is the closest thing to absolute power that exists in America. Power held by private individuals, answerable to no democratic process. The 3 presidential assassinations represent an important historical pattern. America's monetary system has been defended through violence against those who threaten to change it. Whether the assassinations were directly orchestrated by banking interests or were carried out by individuals who understood the stakes and acted accordingly remains historically unclear. But the pattern is undeniable. Every president who seriously threatened the banking system's monopoly on money creation either was assassinated or faced political destruction. The question for modern Americans is whether they should accept a system where private banks control the money supply and charge interest to the government for currency creation. Should money be created by private bankers seeking profit, or should it be created by elected representatives accountable to the people? Lincoln believed government should control its own money. Garfield believed the same. Kennedy believed it too. All 3 were dead before they could implement their visions. Today, the Federal Reserve remains in control. Americans remain enslaved to a system of private money creation. The banking elite remains extraordinarily powerful, extracting trillions from the American economy through control of the money supply. The 3 assassinations may have been isolated incidents, or they may represent a pattern of violence used to protect the banking system's power. Either way, the result is the same. The American government remains subordinate to private bankers, and the American people remain ignorant of the financial architecture that controls their lives. That's the story of how 3 American presidents died fighting for monetary sovereignty and how the banking elite maintained their monopoly on money creation through assassination and political destruction. If you found this exploration of hidden financial history compelling, subscribe to Money Stories for more uncovered truths about the systems that control our world. Leave a comment below. Do you think the government should control its own money supply, or should that power remain with private banks? Thanks for watching Money Stories, and I'll see you in the next episode.